Hi and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm going to be painting this scene with a beautiful Welsh cottage on a hill, and behind it you can see down in the valley the estuary and the coast and a headland in the distance. I really like the way the classic white Welsh cottage with its grey slate roof sort of stands out against the dramatic rain-heavy sky, and the way that the sea and the estuary in the background really lights up the whole picture, and you just get that sense of depth and distance. I was inspired by this photograph here that I found on Pixabay, and I shall leave a link to it in the description below. And as always, I've simplified the scene, tried to just include the main elements that I feel that are important, move things around a little bit for the sake of composition. So I've moved the cottage across to the right a little, so it sort of sits a little over a third into the painting and becomes a really nice focal point. The next stage is to use waterproof fine liners and to build up the line work using them. It's important that we use waterproof fine liners. I'm using Pigmont microns here, and I like size 0.3, 0.5 and 0.7 for different sort of width of lines. I'm going over my pencil sketch, adding in a little bit more shading, a little bit of hatching, maybe some cross hatching, just to suggest the landscape. I've sped it up because it can be quite a long process, but with line and wash it creates the structure, so it's quite an important part of line and wash. And I think it's a great way for beginners especially to learn the basics of simplifying from photographs, as well as getting in that drawing practice. And once you've got the line work there, then it creates a wonderful structure for your painting, a sort of a roadmap, if you see what I mean, so you know exactly where your washes need to go. My board is at an angle now of 45 degrees. That's my preferred angle for painting. I'm using the back of an old painting, and today it's Saunders Waterford cold pressed paper, 11 inches by 15 inches, or about 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. And it's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. I'm going to wet the sky all over and paint the sky wet in wet. And then I shall continue down and paint the land wet onto the dry page. So I wet the sky all over using a Princeton Acrylite Mottler brush, 1.5 inches, but use any large wash brush to wet the sky. And then using a size 14 synthetic mop brush by Escoda, an Escoda Ultimo, but use any large wash brush. I'm painting the sky using a mixture of cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, neutral tint, and there's a bit of burnt sienna to grey it down a bit in places. So I can try and get those lovely stormy clouds in first, heavy with rain. I want to try and have a little bit of variety to the tones so that I can give the impression in this wet in wet painting of some clouds coming in over the headlands from the distance, sort of a rainstorm blowing in across the estuary. I'm leaving some gaps, so some white paper showing that there will be less as I paint. You can see that the paint is running down the page a bit and diffusing because my board's at an angle. I'm starting to get some really nice wet in wet effects. I'm trying to make my brush strokes narrower and closer together as I come down to the horizon, so I can indicate the much smaller clouds in the far distance. Everything will soften and diffuse as it dries and dry off a lot lighter than this, so I'm trying to make sure it's dark enough to give me that really nice atmospheric Welsh sky. After all, this is a sky painting because, proportionately speaking, about 3/4 of the painting space on the page is devoted to the sky here. So even though there is some detail and the focal point of the cottage is in the land area, everything there is kind of a backdrop for this dramatic and beautiful sky. And I've brought the sky colour down into the sea and the estuary behind the cottage. And now I'm just putting in a bit of that lovely slatey sky colour into the roof to start off that grey slate Welsh roof. And now to paint the land. So I've mixed up a nice grungy green, and that's been mixed up with cobalt blue, a touch of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and a touch of neutral tint, and I can vary the amounts of each of those colours according to the kind of green that I want. And I can add some lemon yellow to the mix where I want it a little bit brighter, and where I want some of those beautiful sort of red plants and grasses, lovely warm tones in the foreground, then I can add a lot more burnt sienna to my green. And even though I'm painting onto the dry page, because remember I didn't wet my land, once the washes cover the page, then those become wet washes, and any other paint that I add into that is painted wet in wet. I'm still using my Escoda Ultimo size 14 mop brush for this. I'm trying to sort of keep my brush stroke directions on a slight slant, and these will again help to suggest the lay of the land, as this isn't a flat landscape. And also you've got the directionality of the brushwork, which sort of works for a classic sort of S-shaped composition. So the brushwork is coming up and the hill direction from bottom right, and it's sort of zigzagging across the page from right to left, and then across the ridge with the cottage, then back again behind the cottage for the distant beach, and then up into the sky. So using brushwork to help to reinforce that compositional idea leads the viewer's eye into the painting. So almost all of my washes are in place now. Now what I need to do is to take a clean, damp, flat brush. Once I've finished getting this green in, it's important that it's clean, and it's important that it's only damp, not wet, because I don't want to introduce any extra moisture to the painting at the moment. That will cause runs and cauliflowers. But I can lift out the estuary and the water behind the cottage across the entire painting, and straight away that gives us that depth of distance and the light shining on the water, and gives us that illusion of not only depth but aerial perspective as we're looking down the hill towards the beach from the cottage. And now I need to step away from the painting, not touch it at all, let it dry completely, and then I'll come back once it's dry and finish the painting off. So here it is, it's all dry, and so I'm going to work on the distant beach and headland or land that's stretching off into the distance. First, using the tips of my flat brush and a slightly greyed down raw sienna with a little bit of the cobalt blue added to it, but quite weak. Just going to indicate a little bit of sandy beach on this side of the water in the distance. And then using the same grey as the sky, but a really quite a weak mixture of grey, but enough depth to it, and carefully using the tips of the flat brush, I'm going to paint in the headland and the land sweeping off round into the distance. I'm going to be keeping my lines quite fine and quite flat and following the horizon line so that I can really get that sense of depth and distance with the land stretching off sort of almost out of sight. I can touch in slightly darker mixes of this grey, not too much because I do want it to be quite faint, but just to break up that area a little bit with some slight variation in the tone. And I think that should just about do. Then using that same grey, leaving a gap for the estuary, river and sea, I can just darken up to indicate some bushes and trees in the far distance, just the other side of the valley before the estuary. I'll do that both sides of the cottage. And I think the cottage is beginning to stand out, and this little bit of subtle detail in the background is pushing everything back a lot further. Now, again with that shadow colour, but this time with a little bit of raw sienna added to it and a touch of lemon yellow, I'm going to add in just a few little patches of darker grass, again oriented from bottom left towards the cottage, so the brush strokes are important, that they're following that sort of orientation just to add a little bit more depth and tone to the foreground. Now onto the bushes surrounding the cottage, and I've added some neutral tint to darken up this green, and in a little bit I shall add some cad yellow to it for variety, and just get this nice dark colour around the cottage, and that should be a really nice contrast or value shift against the white of the cottage. And now, just before it dries, I'm going to use my palette knife just to scrape some paler grasses through the darker paint that I just added a little while ago. And I will scrape through and reveal the lighter paint underneath. And that should just bring some highlights and a bit of added texture into my foreground grasses. I need that to be more sort of something and nothing, if you know what I mean. Nothing too definite, just enough to lead the eye across to the main part of the painting, which is the cottages, then leading across out over to the sea, the distant land, and of course the sky. And now mixing up more of the grey and putting a bit more of it onto the roofs using the 3/4 inch flat brush. And then just adding a bit more shadow with my Escoda size 14 round brush. And then I've decided just to go back to the flat brush and actually make the roofs a lot darker, because then they will just stand out beautifully against the sky and also contrast well against that beautiful whitewashed walls of the house. I'm going to take the tape off and have a look at it. I've got a few little details in mind that I might add, but I want to see how it looks with the clean white border, which gives it a more sort of finished look. It helps you to sort of look at it with fresh eyes, so you can assess whether it's finished, whether it needs just a few extra touches. So here it is. I think I need to use my fine liner and just go in for a few more details. I'm going to join up these poles, and I added a couple of extra ones, and put some telegraph wires between the poles with the fine liner. I'm just sort of using a sort of hit and miss curved mark. I'm making it quickly and spontaneously. I'm not worried about them being exactly the right sort of place. It's just to give that impression. And I quite like that. And there's another little detail that isn't in the, I can't see it in the photograph, but if you look closely, there's sort of gaps between the hedges and in front of the cottage. And I'm thinking that it would be a really nice detail just to add in a few fence posts, maybe a sort of little gate. So literally just a few lines, really short vertical lines with the fine liner, just to finish it off. And having a close look, I really like the way that looks. I think that's just finished it off nicely. It sometimes can be just little things that really help. And talking of little things, I think just to add a bit more texture to the roof, I'm going to do some horizontal lines, sort of just quickly and scruffily through the roof, just to give the idea and the impression of a little bit more texture and a bit more of the look of those tiles made from Welsh slate. And I'll do that for this this little shed or whatever it is that's obviously built down a lot lower. We can only just see the roof and none of the building itself. But again, just these horizontal lines following the shape of the roof, just add that little bit of texture. And here's the finished painting. And I really enjoyed painting this. I think when I'm in the right mood, line and wash is my favourite style of painting. And I really enjoy painting these sorts of rugged and desolate landscapes. Well, I look forward to reading what you think in the comments. So let me know what you think. And please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you click on the bell icon, then you'll be notified whenever we post a new demo. So thank you so much for watching, thank you for your support, and thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. We really do appreciate you all. Many thanks, and I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.